On October 15, 1943, above the wreckage and devastation of New Britain, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Lieutenant Colonel Hero Nishizawa banked his Zero hard to the left, diving down toward what looked like an easy kill. An American fighter, separated and vulnerable, deep in territory that belonged to Japan. For 2 years, this had been a death sentence for Allied pilots. The Zero dominated these skies with legendary agility and that incredible 1,000-mile range. But today, everything was about to change. Through his canopy, Nishizawa watched in shock as the twin-engine American aircraft didn't turn and run like it should have. Instead, it pulled up and accelerated. That P-38 Lightning climbed at an angle that defied everything Japanese pilots had learned about what was possible. At 400 miles per hour in a dive, with a ceiling of 31,000 feet and firepower that could shred a Zero in seconds, Japanese pilots across the Pacific were discovering something terrifying. A new reality they weren't prepared for. The Lightning was different. It hunted them in places they thought were safe. That distinctive twin-tailed silhouette was becoming the nightmare of Japanese aviation, and it meant something had fundamentally shifted in this war. On March 15, 1944, Major Thomas Maguire pulled his P-38 Lightning into a steep banking turn at 28,000 feet. The twin Allison engines hummed with deadly efficiency as he scanned the skies above Wewak. Below him stretched a sprawling Japanese airfield complex across the New Guinea coastline, looking like a spiderweb of concrete and steel, studded with the unmistakable shapes of Mitsubishi Zeros. The hunting season had officially begun. The transformation from desperate defense to aggressive dominance hadn't happened overnight. Just 18 months before, American pilots had been flying what amounted to aerial coffins. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat, with its 318-mile-per-hour maximum speed and pitiful climb rate, was being systematically slaughtered by Japanese pilots who could outrun, outclimb, and outmaneuver every fighter the Americans sent up. The Zero's combat radius of nearly 1,000 miles let Japanese pilots strike deep into Allied territory and return safely while American fighters struggled just to escort bombers short distances. Then the P-38 Lightning arrived and everything changed. The numbers told a story that Japanese command desperately wanted to ignore. Where the Zero climbed at 2,300 feet per minute, the Lightning reached 2,800. The Zero maxed out at 332 miles per hour in level flight. The Lightning cruised at 414. The real difference lay in firepower. The Zero carried two 220mm cannons and 2 machine guns. The Lightning mounted 4 50-caliber machine guns and a single 20mm cannon concentrated in the nose, creating a cone of pure destruction that could disintegrate an enemy aircraft in a 2-second burst. Wing Commander Nobuo Fujita was among the first Japanese pilots to encounter this new reality over Bougainville in December 1943. On a routine dawn patrol, Fujita spotted what appeared to be vulnerable American bombers escorted by unfamiliar twin-engine fighters. Standard doctrine was simple: ignore the escorts and dive on the bombers, using your superior speed to slash through the formation before the Americans could react. Fujita led his squadron down from 30,000 feet, building speed for what should have been routine slaughter. But the Lightning pilots didn't scatter or defend defensively. They turned directly toward the diving Zeros, accelerating into head-on attacks that violated every principle of fighter combat the Japanese had learned. In the traditional dance of Pacific aerial warfare, fighters maneuvered for position, seeking the perfect angle of attack while avoiding head-to-head confrontations that could destroy both aircraft. The Lightning pilots seemed to relish these charges, and Fujita quickly understood why. That concentrated nose-mounted firepower meant even a brief moment of alignment was lethal. The Zero's wing-mounted guns required precise deflection shooting to be effective in a head-on pass. Fujita's wingman, Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, lasted exactly 3 seconds in his first encounter with a Lightning. Captain Charles MacDonald of the 475th Fighter Group had opened fire at 800 yards. Tracers walked steadily toward Yamamoto's Zero as both aircraft closed at a combined speed exceeding 700 miles per hour. The 20mm cannon shells tore through the Zero's lightweight construction like a chainsaw through bamboo, transforming the once graceful fighter into a tumbling fireball that disappeared into the jungle canopy below. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Japanese pilots who had ruled the Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor suddenly found themselves hunted by an aircraft that could follow them anywhere. The Lightning's twin-engine reliability meant mechanical failure rarely forced a mission abort, while the Zero's single engine became a liability when damaged. Most critically, the Lightning's operational range of over 1,100 miles with external tanks allowed American pilots to penetrate deep into Japanese-held territory and attack airfields that had always been safe. Lieutenant Colonel Hero Nishizawa, Japan's leading ace with over 80 confirmed kills, experienced this new reality firsthand during a patrol over Rabaul in early 1944. Nishizawa had built his reputation on the Zero's legendary ability to outmaneuver opponents in turning fights, using the aircraft's agility to stay inside an enemy's turn radius until he could bring his guns to bear. Against the Lightning, this tactic became a death trap. The American pilots refused to engage in traditional dogfights. Instead, they used their superior speed and climb rate to attack from above, fire a devastating burst, and escape before the Zeros could respond. Captain MacDonald and other Lightning pilots had perfected what Americans called boom and zoom tactics, specifically designed to counter the Zero's turning advantage. Rather than attempting to outturn the nimble Japanese fighter, Lightning pilots dove from altitude, fired at high speed, and climbed away using their superior power-to-weight ratio. A Zero pilot faced an impossible choice: try to follow the climbing Lightning and stall out in the thin air above 30,000 feet, or stay at low altitude and wait for the next diving attack. The frustration among Japanese pilots was palpable and growing. Saburo Sakai, a veteran squadron leader from Pearl Harbor and the early Pacific campaigns, described the Lightning as two fighters welded together by American engineers who understood nothing about aerial combat, yet somehow created a monster. His assessment was both wrong and prophetic. The Lightning's unconventional twin-engine, twin-boom design wasn't the result of ignorance. It was careful engineering that prioritized firepower concentration, pilot survival, and operational flexibility above all else. The technical specifications told the story of Japan's mounting desperation. By spring 1944, American production lines were delivering over 300 Lightnings monthly, while Japanese aircraft production struggled just to replace combat losses. Every Lightning, rolling off the Lockheed assembly line in Burbank, carried sophisticated equipment that Japanese pilots could only dream about. Oxygen systems allowing comfortable operation above 40,000 feet, turbo-supercharged engines maintaining power at extreme altitude, and radio equipment providing crystal-clear communication over hundreds of miles. More devastating than technical superiority was the Lightning's psychological impact on Japanese morale. Pilots who once launched from their bases with confidence now scanned the sky nervously for that distinctive twin-boom silhouette that meant death from above. The Lightning's ability to appear anywhere in the Pacific meant no Japanese airfield, no matter how remote, was safe from attack. This constant pressure wore down Japanese aircrews already pushed beyond their limits by 2 years of continuous combat. The numbers painted an increasingly grim picture. In the first quarter of 1944, Lightning pilots claimed over 400 Japanese aircraft destroyed against fewer than 60 Lightnings lost, a kill ratio that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. More importantly, many of those lost Japanese aircraft carried irreplaceable veteran pilots whose experience and skill had been the backbone of Japanese air superiority. Lieutenant Colonel Hero Nishizawa stared at the tactical board in the operations bunker at Rabaul. His weathered hands traced the red pins marking yet another devastating Lightning attack. June 23, 1944. In the past 72 hours, American P-38s had destroyed 18 Japanese aircraft on the ground at 3 different airfields, penetrated nearly 400 miles into Japanese-held territory, and escaped without a single confirmed loss. The traditional response of sending up interceptors to drive off attackers had become a futile exercise that only added more red pins to the board. The anger building in Japanese pilot ranks since the Lightning's introduction had reached a boiling point. Captain Tetsuzo Iwamoto, One of Japan's most decorated aces with over 60 kills slammed his fist on the briefing table, addressing his squadron. The Lightnings weren't just defeating Japanese pilots in fair combat. They were systematically destroying the entire foundation of Japanese aerial strategy. For 3 years, Japanese doctrine relied on the Zero's superior range and agility to control vast areas of Pacific airspace. Now, American pilots used the Lightning's even greater range and devastating firepower to hunt Japanese aircraft in their own territory. The tactical reforms Japanese command implemented in response revealed their desperation. Traditional Japanese fighter tactics emphasized individual skill and aircraft performance, with pilots trained to exploit the Zero's turning ability in one-on-one combat. Against the Lightning, these methods were suicidal. Japanese pilots found themselves forced to adopt defensive formations they'd never practiced, flying in tight groups that sacrificed their aircraft's natural advantages in a desperate attempt to provide mutual protection against Lightning attacks. Squadron leader Saburo Sakai proposed the most radical tactical shift: massive formations of 12 to 16 Zeros attacking in coordinated waves. The theory was sound, concentrating firepower to overwhelm the Lightning's defensive capabilities and force American pilots into turning combat where the Zero's agility might still provide an advantage. In practice, these formations became massive targets for Lightning pilots who could engage from beyond the effective range of the Zero's wing-mounted guns, slash through the formation with devastating bursts, and escape before the Japanese pilots could coordinate a response. The first test of these new tactics came over Hollandia in July 1944. Nishizawa personally led 24 Zeros in a coordinated attack on a formation of 12 Lightnings escorting B-25 bombers. The Japanese pilots maintained perfect formation discipline, approaching from the sun at optimal attack angles that would have guaranteed success against any previous American fighter. Major Maguire, leading the Lightning escort, ignored Japanese doctrine entirely. Instead of defending the bombers through defensive maneuvers, he ordered his pilots to abandon the B-25s and attack the Zero formation head-on. The engagement lasted exactly 11 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 14 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed, including 2 piloted by veteran aces with over 40 kills each. The Lightnings lost 1 aircraft to a lucky hit from a Zero's 20mm cannon, but the pilot successfully bailed out over Allied territory and was recovered 3 hours later. The devastating blow wasn't just about the numbers of aircraft lost. What truly shattered Japanese confidence was discovering that even their most skillfully executed tactics could be torn apart by American pilots who simply refused to play by the rulebook. Captain Iwamoto felt this reality crash down on him with full force during a patrol near Wewak on August 5, 1944. He was flying at 25,000 feet, his 8 Zeros locked in a tight defensive formation, when Iwamoto's radar picked up 4 Lightnings streaming in from the northeast, still far away but closing fast. Everything in Japanese training told him what should happen next. The formation would hold its altitude, stay disciplined, and try to lure the Americans into the kind of twisting dogfight where a Zero's nimble turning could finally make the difference. The American pilots had read a completely different playbook. Instead of charging straight in, they split their formation into 2 separate pairs. One element climbed rapidly toward 32,000 feet, while the other dove down to 18,000 feet. It was a devastating move because now any Zero that tried to climb up and engage one pair would leave itself completely exposed to a killing attack from below. Iwamoto realized with mounting dread that he was caught in a 3-dimensional trap with no escape route. Every move he made seemed to lead directly into a disaster. When he climbed to meet the upper Lightnings, the lower pair would swoop in and savage his wingman. When he dropped to defend his squadron mates, the higher Lightnings would dive through with guns blazing, tearing the formation apart. The repeated failures began eating away at Japanese pilot psychology in deeply troubling ways. Desperate for any advantage, some Zero pilots started carrying extra ammunition belts, piling on so much extra weight that their fuel capacity dropped below 600 miles of range. They were gambling that those extra bullets might let them land a killing blow during brief, violent encounters. Others went the opposite direction, stripping away armor plating and self-sealing fuel tank protection just to squeeze out a little extra speed. None of it worked. The Lightnings remained faster, more powerful, more dangerous. Wing Commander Nobuo Fujita invented what pilots began calling the kamikaze turn, a maneuver where Zeros would wrench their aircraft into the tightest, most violent turn possible when attacked, trying to force American pilots to either overshoot or stall out trying to follow. Once, just once, it actually worked. An American pilot who hadn't yet learned to respect high-altitude combat tried to stay with a Zero through a desperate climbing turn, and his engines quit at 38,000 feet. Japanese intelligence officers grabbed onto this single victory like it was proof of some brilliant new technique, circulating reports as if they'd found the answer to everything. The real story was far bleaker. By September 1944, Japanese factories could barely produce 800 new fighters each month, but pilots were losing 3 aircraft for every one they managed to replace. The Lightnings could fly deep inland now, so airfields that had always seemed protected were suddenly vulnerable to attack. Fresh-faced pilots showing up at combat units with maybe 200 hours of training found themselves going up against American veterans who had logged over 500 hours and spent a year and a half in continuous combat. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto survived more encounters with Lightnings than most pilots did, and he poured his anguish into his diary. "That twin-tailed demon is everywhere," he wrote. "We take off at dawn and search the sky for the shape that spells death. We climb to 30,000 feet, and it's waiting there above us. We push down toward sea level, and it hunts us down there too, its engine shrieking like something from hell itself. There's no height we're safe at. There's no distance far enough that we escape those guns." The Lightnings had advantages Japanese pilots couldn't overcome. American pilots flew flexible tactics, changing and adapting to exploit whatever weaknesses they spotted in Japanese formations. Meanwhile, rigid doctrine bound Japanese airmen to predetermined responses. The twin engines on Lightnings meant mechanical failures rarely happened, while their enormous range let American pilots stay airborne for hours, circling and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Captain MacDonald's 433rd Fighter Squadron developed a deadly specialty called fighter sweeps. Long missions designed purely to hunt down and destroy Japanese fighters while they were still near their own bases. It went against everything traditional fighter doctrine taught. Fighters were supposed to defend bombers, not roam the skies looking for enemy fighters. But the Lightning's range, speed, and firepower made impossible things suddenly possible. Japanese pilots found themselves under attack while taxiing down runways, caught on landing approaches, even hit while sitting vulnerable on the ground getting maintenance done. It all added up to a complete collapse of Japanese air dominance across the Pacific. By October 1944, every Japanese pilot who took off expected to see Lightnings. Mission planning stopped being about objectives and became about survival alone. Major Thomas Maguire eased back on the throttle of his P-38 Lightning as he crossed the international dateline, commanding 16 fighters on a long-range flight nobody had attempted before in the Pacific. October 14, 1944. Manila lay 850 miles ahead, surrounded by Japanese airfields packed with over 200 enemy aircraft in what intelligence said was a last-ditch effort to hold the Philippines. This mission represented everything Japanese pilots had learned to dread about what Lightnings had become. Early in the war, Lightnings had been used defensively to protect other aircraft and keep enemy fighters away from friendly territory. Now American commanders were deploying them as a strategic strike weapon, reaching targets no single-engine fighter could ever touch. The P-38 could carry 2,000-pound bombs while keeping its full air-to-air fighting capability intact. It could function as a fighter, a bomber, and a reconnaissance aircraft all at the same time, roles that Japanese military thinking insisted required separate specialized planes for each job. Lieutenant Colonel William Harris had spent months figuring out how to make all this possible. He'd studied every combat report he could find, looking for patterns in how Japanese pilots got beaten. What he discovered was that Zeros were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing when they were low, flying in rigid patterns, unable to maneuver. Traditional fighter doctrine had always emphasized high-altitude dogfights, but Harris realized that the Lightning's particular strengths, Two engines for reliability, devastating firepower, incredible range, made it perfect for something completely different. It should attack Japanese planes at their weakest moments on the ground and in their landing patterns. The breakthrough came in September over Balikpapan when Captain Charles MacDonald's squadron arrived over a Japanese airfield just as a whole formation of Zeros was coming in to land. Instead of waiting for them to touch down and then strafing them, MacDonald told his pilots to attack the Zeros while they were still in the air but committed to landing. The Japanese planes were in landing configuration, gear hanging down, flaps extended, engines throttled back, completely helpless. 16 Zeros died in less than 5 minutes, and not a single American plane was scratched. This success changed everything. Lightning operations got reorganized from top to bottom. American commanders stopped waiting for Japanese aircraft to show up unexpectedly. Instead, they studied intelligence reports and reconnaissance photos to figure out when Japanese pilots typically launched their patrols. Lightning formations were scheduled to arrive at Japanese airfields precisely when those Zeros would be most exposed, either climbing out during dawn launch sequences or limping back after long patrols with nearly empty fuel tanks and worn-out pilots struggling to stay focused. Wing Commander Nobuo Fujita learned this lesson in October over Lady Gulf when his formation of 12 Zeros finished a routine 3-hour patrol and was heading home to Tacloban. They spotted what looked like a single Lightning cruising alone at low altitude, and standard doctrine said the whole formation should pounce on the isolated American. But Fujita had learned to distrust targets that seemed too easy. His instincts proved right when that lone Lightning suddenly went vertical at full power, and suddenly there were 16 additional P-38s that had been hiding at wave-top level. Invisible to Japanese radar because the coastal mountains blocked their view, the battle that followed showed how far Lightning tactics had evolved. The American pilots had studied exactly how Japanese formations returned to base and positioned themselves to hit Fujita's Zeros at their worst moment. Those 12 aircraft were running low on fuel, their pilots exhausted from hours at altitude, their ammunition depleted from earlier fights. The Lightnings thundered in with full fuel tanks and full ammunition racks. The outcome was never in doubt before guns even fired. Maguire's personal approach to combat flying captured this entire new philosophy. Rather than mixing it up in traditional dogfights where superior aircraft handling decided things, he relied on intelligence and timing to make sure his enemies were already beaten before the first shot. His October mission to Manila showed this strategy taken to its ultimate conclusion. A deep strike aimed to hit Japanese airfields during their morning launch window, when dozens of aircraft would be sitting on runways or circling in landing patterns. The technical advances that made these missions work displayed American industrial power in stark relief. Extended-range Lightning operations used specially designed drop tanks, carrying over 900 gallons of fuel per engine, letting pilots operate at distances that would have been suicide for most Japanese bombers. When the tanks ran empty, they dropped clean away instantly, leaving the Lightning with full fighting capability instead of being dragged down by useless metal containers. Japanese commanders tried every response they could think of. Some ordered constant combat patrols above their own airfields, hoping to intercept Lightnings before they could hit parked aircraft. The strategy was ruinously expensive in fuel and pilot endurance and offered practically no protection. The Lightning's speed advantage meant American pilots attacked whenever and wherever they wanted, often hitting outlying installations while Japanese interceptors were stuck protecting the main bases. Lieutenant Colonel Hero Nishizawa flew what would be his final combat mission, protecting Clark Field near Manila alongside 8 other Zeros. When he spotted Maguire's formation approaching from the southeast at 28,000 feet, years of instinct told him to climb and fight. But experience had taught him that Lightnings rarely appeared where expected. While he focused upward on the high-altitude threat, 4 more Lightnings came screaming in from the ground, destroying 3 Zeros on the runway before anyone could even react. These kinds of defeats cut deeper than mere tactical losses. Japanese pilots who had grown up believing in their natural superiority over Western flyers now faced an enemy combining superior technology with superior tactics. The lightning symbolized everything Japanese military culture struggled to accept. Machines outperforming warrior spirit, organized planning beating tradition, engineering triumph over individual skill. Captain MacDonald's combat records from this period show just how thoroughly American pilots had mastered lightning warfare. His squadron's October missions typically ran 8 hours, covering 1,500 miles with multiple combat engagements spread across huge stretches of ocean. Only the Lightning's twin engines and dual redundancy made such operations feasible, letting pilots push through battle damage that would have crippled other aircraft. The devastating armament meant quick, brutal fights could end with American victory. By late 1944, the statistics painted an unmistakable picture. Japanese pilots were losing 5 aircraft for every one they replaced. Experienced pilot casualties had climbed so high that training new replacements became impossible. Fresh arrivals at combat units could expect to fly fewer than 10 missions before being killed. By contrast, American Lightning pilots completed 100-mission tours with aircraft loss rates staying below 5%. The Lightning had transformed from a specialized high-altitude interceptor into something far more dangerous, the Pacific's ultimate tool for dominating the skies. Japanese pilots who once commanded the skies now found themselves scanning the heavens with dread, searching for that unmistakable silhouette. 2 booms jutting from a single fuselage that spelled the end of their air superiority. The sight meant only one thing: systematic, inexorable defeat. Lieutenant Colonel Hero Nishizawa sat frozen in the cockpit of his Mitsubishi Zero at Mabalacat Airfield in the Philippines, staring at the fuel gauge as it crept dangerously close to empty. Ground crews rushed about below, desperately hunting for enough aviation gasoline to get the morning patrol airborne. January 7, 1945. Japan's unraveling in the Pacific was no longer theoretical, it had become brutally clear. Not through sudden, catastrophic defeats on some battlefield, but through something far more insidious, a stranglehold on supply lines so complete that even the will to fight became meaningless. American P-38 Lightnings had methodically picked apart the fuel dumps, destroyed the supply convoys, and dismantled the transportation networks that kept Japanese fighters in the air. Once formidable Zeros had become little more than expensive museum pieces locked to the ground. The shift had been deliberate and merciless. Where Japanese pilots once launched from island bases across the vast Pacific, trusting in their aircraft's nimbleness and their own combat skills, they now faced every mission knowing their fuel tanks would be half full at best, their ammunition reduced, and that Lightning formations were hunting them with the precision of an industrial machine. Wing Commander Nobuo Fujita's operational records from December 1944 told the story in cold numbers. His squadron had begun September with 42 flyable Zeros. Now he could muster exactly 9. Replacement aircraft and pilots, the lifeblood of any fighting force, had slowed to a trickle. There was no way to maintain even basic operational capability anymore. In desperation, Japanese High Command abandoned decades of proven air combat doctrine and embraced increasingly extreme tactical innovations. For years, Japanese fighter pilots had relied on their individual mastery and their aircraft's superior maneuverability. The Lightnings had neutralized those advantages completely. American pilots simply refused to turn and dogfight. They attacked from angles Japanese Zeros couldn't match, then climbed away at speeds that left Japanese fighters behind. So commanders changed everything. Out went the emphasis on individual pilot brilliance. In came mass formation attacks, every serviceable aircraft hurled at the enemy in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers rather than tactical cunning. The first real test of these desperate new tactics came on January the 9th over Lingayen Gulf. 63 Japanese aircraft, every Zero, Oscar, and Tony that could still fly in the northern Philippines, launched in a coordinated assault on the American invasion fleet below. The formation represented the largest Japanese air operation in months, put together carefully around intelligence reports suggesting a window of vulnerability in American fighter coverage. Major Thomas Maguire's 14th Fighter Group was waiting. 32 Lightnings intercepted the Japanese formation 90 miles out, and what followed would become the largest single air battle of the Pacific War's final phase. 47 minutes. That was all it took to demonstrate a harsh truth. Numbers could not overcome the Lightning's overwhelming technological superiority. Japanese pilots flying in tight formations, meant for mutual defense, found they couldn't maneuver when Lightnings attacked from multiple angles at once. The concentrated firepower that seemed so dangerous in theory became a catastrophe in practice. American pilots attacked from beyond the effective range of Japanese wing guns, destroying aircraft systematically before Japanese pilots could even bring their weapons to bear. Captain Charles MacDonald, flying as Maguire's wingman, later described the engagement in starkly simple terms, like shooting fish in a barrel with a shotgun. His after-action report detailed the pattern that would repeat throughout the battle. Lightnings used their altitude and speed to dive on the Japanese formation, raking it with gunfire, then climbing back up at tremendous speed, out of reach before Japanese pilots could respond. Aircraft fell burning from the sky. Then the Lightnings would come around and do it again. Eventually, the surviving Japanese pilots abandoned formation discipline in desperation. They broke apart, each pilot trying for individual escape, which only made them easier targets for the American fighters. The slaughter was almost unimaginable. 51 Japanese aircraft confirmed destroyed. Another 8 probably destroyed. Only 4 made it back to base. The Lightnings lost 3 aircraft, all shot down by ground fire during low-level strafing runs, not from aerial combat. But the numerical casualties, shocking as they were, didn't capture the true disaster. The pilots being lost were irreplaceable veterans, the backbone of Japanese air operations since Pearl Harbor. Experience and leadership, developed over years of combat, were simply evaporating. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto was among only 6 Japanese pilots to survive the Lingayen Gulf battle. His account of the engagement revealed something deeper than just tactical defeat. It showed the psychological toll of being systematically destroyed. His Zero had taken lightning cannon fire in the first American attack, destroying his engine's oil system. He managed to glide toward the nearest Japanese-held island. During that 20-minute descent, he watched helplessly as lightning formations moved through his squadron like a scythe through grain, then through his group, then his entire wing. The American attacks were so precise, so coordinated, that Yamamoto realized they weren't fighting individual opponents anymore. They were fighting a system, a technological apparatus that transformed aerial combat into an industrial process, methodical and impersonal. After Lingayen Gulf, organized Japanese air resistance in the Philippines effectively ended. Surviving aircraft scattered to hidden airstrips and camouflaged shelters, emerging only for desperate kamikaze attacks aimed more at symbolic impact than tactical results. The shift from conventional air combat to suicide missions represented Japan's final admission. Their pilots could no longer compete against lightning formations in any traditional sense. Wing Commander Fujita's final operational report, dated February 3, 1945, laid out the collapse in clinical language that barely masked the despair underneath. His remaining pilots averaged fewer than 50 hours of flight time and had never engaged American fighters in actual combat. Their training had been cut short by fuel shortages. Their aircraft were held together with salvaged parts and improvised repairs. Their missions were planned around one principle: avoid the lightnings. The once proud Japanese naval aviators who had dominated Pacific skies for 3 years had been reduced to flying worn-out machines in desperate, hopeless attempts to delay the unavoidable. The lightning's role in this destruction extended far beyond the air battles themselves. American pilots systematically attacked the infrastructure supporting Japanese air operations: fuel storage facilities, maintenance depots, training bases, communication centers. They applied the same methodical precision to ground targets as they did to aerial combat. Captain MacDonald's typical February patrol involved 8 aircraft sweeping across Japanese-held territory for 6 to 8 hours, destroying targets as they found them while maintaining relentless pressure on surviving Japanese units. Psychological warfare became equally devastating. Japanese pilots, who once took to the air with confidence, now approached every takeoff knowing American aircraft were likely waiting. Those American aircraft could outrun them, outclimb them, outgun everything Japan had. That certainty that their defeat was inevitable created a defeatist mentality that spread like poison through squadrons and wings. The aggressive spirit that had defined Japanese aviation since the war's beginning simply evaporated. Major Maguire's final combat mission on January 7, 1945, showed the complete domination Lightnings had achieved. He was leading 4 aircraft on a routine patrol over Negros Island when he spotted a lone Zero limping back toward base after what looked like a failed mission. There was no careful stalking, no tactical maneuvering like the early Lightning engagements. Maguire simply accelerated, fired a short burst from his nose guns, and watched the Zero dissolve in a fireball. Just like that, another Japanese pilot's war was over. The numbers from the Philippines campaign through February 1945 revealed the total collapse of Japanese aviation under lightning pressure. From October 1944 onward, Japanese aircraft losses topped 1,000 confirmed destroyed. Pilot casualties among experienced aviators reached 93%. During that same period, Lightnings lost 67 aircraft, mostly to ground fire and mechanical failure rather than air combat. The kill ratio of nearly 15-1 wasn't just tactical superiority. It represented the complete obsolescence of Japanese aviation doctrine against American technological and industrial might. Wing Commander Nobuo Fujita stood beside his grounded Zero at Kanoya Air Base on the Japanese mainland, staring upward at 2 P-38 Lightnings crossing overhead at 40,000 feet. March 15, 1945. The American aircraft were on a reconnaissance mission over Kyushu, photographing targets for the invasion everyone knew was coming. Japanese air defenses could do nothing to stop them. The remaining operational Zeros lacked the oxygen equipment and high-altitude performance to reach Lightnings at their cruising altitude. Besides, the few pilots who could attempt such missions were being held back for kamikaze attacks against the invasion fleet intelligence suggested would arrive within months. Fujita's quiet acceptance reflected a transformation occurring throughout Japanese aviation that winter of 1945. The rage and frustration Japanese pilots had felt encountering Lightnings had evolved into something unexpected: professional respect tinged with resignation. Lieutenant Colonel Hero Nishizawa, in one of his final interviews before his death in October 1944, had described the Lightning as an opponent worthy of our hatred, precisely because it defeated us with superior engineering rather than superior courage. That grudging admiration represented something fundamental shifting in Japanese military thinking, something unthinkable during the war's early years. Captain Tetsuso Iwamoto kept a combat diary documenting the psychological journey many Japanese pilots experienced as they came to terms with defeat. His entries from 1943 had dripped with contempt for American pilots and absolute confidence in Zero superiority over any Western fighter. By late 1944, his tone had shifted completely. He was writing analytically about Lightning tactics and technology, with respect creeping into his assessments. His final entry, dated April 3, 1945, was brief and devastating. "The Americans built a better airplane. We must learn from this if Japan is to survive the peace that follows this war." The implications reached far beyond military aviation. Japanese society had been built on the conviction that superior spirit and traditional values could overcome material handicaps, a philosophy that had served the nation well through rapid industrialization and early military triumphs. The Lightning's systematic destruction of Japanese air power challenged these fundamental beliefs head-on. An entire generation of pilots confronted a terrible reality. Engineering excellence and industrial capacity could triumph over individual skill and warrior ethos. Major Thomas Maguire's death on January 7, 1945, during a low-level strafing run over Negros Island, gave Japanese pilots something unexpected: a moment of symbolic victory. Maguire embodied Lightning tactics perfectly: aggressive, technically brilliant, tactically innovative. Yet ground fire from anti-aircraft positions brought him down. Captain Charles MacDonald, who witnessed Maguire's final mission, later reflected that his commander's death reminded them all they were fighting human beings, not machines, and that courage existed on both sides of this terrible conflict. The Japanese reaction to news of Maguire's death revealed complex emotions developed over 3 years of lightning encounters. Rather than celebrating the loss of a feared adversary, many Japanese pilots expressed something like regret that such a skilled opponent had been killed by anti-aircraft fire instead of in an aerial duel. Squadron leader Saburo Sakai, speaking in a post-war interview, called Maguire a worthy adversary whose tactics taught us more about our own weaknesses than any amount of training ever could. That acknowledgement of mutual professional respect marked a dramatic departure from the racial animosity that had characterized early Pacific air battles. The technical lessons Japanese pilots drew from lightning encounters would influence Japanese aviation development for decades after the war. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, one of the few Japanese aces to survive, spent considerable time analyzing captured lightning technical manuals and maintenance records. His reports to Japanese aviation engineers emphasized the American obsession with reliability, standardization, and systematic testing, approaches fundamentally different from Japanese design philosophy, which had always prioritized maximum performance over maintainability. The Lightning's twin-engine design, initially dismissed by Japanese engineers as wasteful and unnecessarily complex, now represented everything Japan had misunderstood about modern air warfare. Those redundant engines allowed Lightning pilots to complete missions even after battle damage that would have forced single-engine aircraft to crash or abort. More fundamentally, the Lightning's entire design philosophy prioritized pilot survival and aircraft recovery over squeezing out maximum performance. Experienced pilots could return to fight again instead of being lost with unrecoverable aircraft. Captain McDonald's post-war analysis of Lightning operations revealed the systematic approach that made American tactics so devastating against Japanese pilots trained in individualistic combat. His squadron's success wasn't built on superior pilot skill or aircraft performance. It was built on standardized procedures, intensive training, and meticulous mission planning. This methodical approach to air combat represented a fundamental break from the warrior tradition that had dominated military aviation since its beginning. The final Lightning missions over Japan in summer 1945 showed how completely the balance of Pacific air power had reversed since 1942. American pilots now flew over Japanese cities with complete impunity, the same freedom Japanese pilots had once enjoyed over Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies. The psychological impact on Japanese civilians watching those overflights was profound. The distinctive twin-boom silhouette of the Lightning became a symbol of American technological superiority and Japanese vulnerability, a daily reminder that their world had changed forever. Wing Commander Fujita's surrender interview with American intelligence officers in September 1945 provided the most comprehensive Japanese assessment of the Lightning's impact on Pacific air warfare. His analysis emphasized that American victory hadn't come from superior pilot training or aircraft performance in traditional terms. It came from the systematic application of industrial engineering principles to air combat operations. The Lightning represented American production methods, maintenance procedures, and tactical doctrines that treated aerial warfare as a technological problem requiring technological solutions. The statistics from the war's final months confirmed the scale of Lightning dominance. From January through August 1945, Lightning formations destroyed over 800 Japanese aircraft, while losing fewer than 40 of their own to all causes. That 20-to-1 kill ratio was the most lopsided air combat result in military history, achieved against pilots once considered among the world's finest. The reconciliation between American and Japanese pilots in the post-war period was built on mutual recognition of professional competence rather than ideological agreement. Japanese pilots expressed admiration for the Lightning's engineering excellence and the tactical innovation of American pilots, while acknowledging that their defeat had been inevitable given Japan's inability to match American industrial capacity. That acceptance of technological reality represented a fundamental shift in Japanese military culture that would influence the nation's approach to defense and international relations for generations to come.